Okay, it was a little windy out there. Chapter 21, My Spiritual Journey. This one's a little longer and a lot of pictures. As long as I can remember, I believed in God. I've tried to imagine not believing in Him, and life doesn't make sense to me. I can't even fathom not believing in God. As an infant, I was baptized in the Lutheran Church in Wellsville, although, of course, I don't remember it. We attended the church for a while, but Dad was told he couldn't be a Sunday school teacher because he was a Mason. Dad chose the Masons over the Lutheran Church. And here's the Lutheran Church. As a little girl, I attended the Christian Temple, the Disciples of Christ Church. Mom and Dad attended occasionally. Reverend Hill was a very nice minister whom everyone liked. I went to church in a very pretty frilly dress that Grandma Potter bought me. We had Sunday school in the lower part of the building, in a room filled with lots of little chairs. Across from that room was a room for the much younger children. I remember playing in that room when I was little. But then I moved over to the room with chairs. Ooh, big move. I was probably 3 or 4 years old. We sang, Jesus wants me for a sunbeam. Tell me the stories of Jesus, and Jesus loves me. And here's the Christian Temple building. As I grew older, maybe 6 years old, I went upstairs to the worship service. I was in the young choir with my sister Lori, and we wore robes with white collars when we sang. One of my favorite hymns was Holy, Holy, Holy. I still love it, although the last words are God in three persons, blessed Trinity. I didn't know what Trinity meant. I thought the words were talking about three separate personages, God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost. That's what my mind and heart believed. And here's Lori and Patty in, looks like their choir outfit, and then their Sunday best. Each week, a plate of bread was passed around, and each person took a little piece, and later a little cup of grape juice. We held the bread until Reverend Hill told us to put it in our mouth. By then, I had squished it into little round hard balls. It was exciting to me to eat the bread and drink the grape juice, although I didn't know why I did it. I just knew it had something to do with Jesus. And it was a little tiny spark in my puny understanding of Jesus' sacrifice. By the time we moved into the country, we hadn't attended church for a while. My sister Marcia was married in the Christian Temple with Reverend Hill officiating, but we hadn't been back there before that. Being 7 miles out of town, Mom and Dad weren't about to drop us off at Sunday school anywhere. Not far from our house was a Mennonite church. The children in the area, including our Phantom neighbors, attended the church. We began to attend with them. And here's the Mennonite Church of York's Corner. Double what it used to be. That's what it says. Each week, Reba Newcomer picked us up for church. It was a small, simple building with wooden benches and floors, not as fancy as the polished benches of the Christian Temple. We had singing time together, adults and children, and then went to Sunday school class in a side room that had been added on. After the class, we had a short worship service. I loved the singing time. The chorister was a young man. Lehman was his last name, who was so animated and who loved the children's songs so much. He taught me songs like A Wise Man Built His House Upon a Rock, a little different than our version. The Bible spelled out, and I have joy, joy, joy down in my heart. Sorry, that one reminds me of The Simpsons. I loved his song so much that I decided to write my own song about Jesus that I hoped they would sing in their song time. I spent many hours swinging in our big swing in the backyard trying to come up with this song. I still remember it to this day, along with the music. It's not fabulous, not even close, but I was about 10 years old when I wrote it. Here it is. Feel free as the birds in the sky. Feel free as the birds fly by. Feel free as oft as you can, and Jesus will lend you his hand. Feel free as oft as you can, and Jesus will lend you his hand. Feel free as oft as you can, and Jesus will lend you his hand. Well, that was my last effort at songwriting. I thought it was really good. During the summertime, Reba picked us up every day for a couple of weeks for Bible school. Jeannie and I, along with June Phantom, went to it and had such a great time. I learned more of the stories of the Bible that became embedded deep in my heart. One day, Reba and Mrs. Smoker, the pastor's wife, took June, Jeannie, and I downstairs into the basement where we sat in a sort of semicircle. We were told to tell what we thought of Jesus then we were saved. I didn't realize why we were going downstairs, and I don't remember being asked. When we got down there, June started talking and crying. Then it was my turn. I didn't understand what I was supposed to do, so I just babbled about Jesus and pretended to get weepy. It wasn't a bad experience. I just didn't know what it was all about. As I look back, my parents weren't consulted on it. Today, I would not have been a happy parent if someone did this with my child without my permission, even though their intentions were of the utmost importance. We always had a Bible in our home. Dad was a fifth-degree Master Mason at the Blue Lodge, so our King James Version Bible had the Masonic symbol on it. We also had a book about the story of Adam and Eve that I flipped through regularly. One Christmas time, when Mom and Dad went out to eat with my brother Larry and his wife Dixie, I prepared a little nativity scene program to put on when they came home. We had never done anything like that in our home before. My siblings participated in it, dressed up in homemade costumes. We practiced the song Away in a Manger so that when Mom, Dad, Larry, and Dixie walked in, we could present it. So there we were, kneeling on the floor around the manger when they walked in. Oh, I remember this sad story. And since no one else dared to join in, I sang a horrible solo. Mom bought Jenny and I some records that had Bible stories and songs on them. We wore them out. I listened by the hour as a 10 and 11-year-old. I still sing some parts of the songs today. What parts I can remember. Here's an example from the story of the baby who was brought to Solomon because two women claimed to be the mother. Since both couldn't be, Solomon said he'd cut the baby in half and give half to each woman. Of course, the real mother didn't want the baby cut in half. Right, said one. Oh no, the other, don't let my baby die. Solomon said, then you're the mother. A mother's love don't lie. Yes, it said don't. I still remember the tune to the song, very dramatic. Sometime in my early teens, my parents decided to go to church as a family. We had never done that before. Mom had been raised in the Methodist church, and they decided that was the church we would all attend. We drove into Wellsville every week and attended Sunday school and worship services. We did this for a while, but it didn't last. I attended the Catholic church with a close friend, Sue Stout, whenever I stayed at her house, and attended the Methodist church with my friend Diane Sybil in my teen years. Here's the First Methodist Church. Since we lived in the country, not many people visited us. Occasionally, however, members of the church came to the door to share their message. Dad never listened and always turned them away and immediately. One denomination was particularly persistent, so Dad told them he was a Muslim and they never returned. When I was 17 years old, two young men found our house out in the middle of nowhere. They said they were looking for Lori Stannard, my sister, but with their slight accent, they sounded like they were saying Larry Stannard. Dad greeted them. In fact, we all greeted them, and we found that they were looking for my sister. Lori was away at school in Rochester, so the young men persisted in talking to Dad. They introduced themselves as Elder Russell and Elder Wiley. How strange, I thought. These two young men had the same first name, and an unusual one at that. Dad invited them in. What? Dad invited them in? Yes, Dad invited them in. They had a message they wanted to share with us, and Dad said yes. Oh, and they just happened to have a flannel board in their car that they used to teach their message. The others came back one more time and taught a message. Then Dad told them not to visit again. We simply weren't interested. Since we were the only people in the whole area who were being taught by these missionaries, it must have been a very heavy disappointment when their only investigator said not to come back. The elders asked Dad if it was okay for him if the next set of missionaries that came into the area could visit us. Dad said sure, they could, never dreaming they would actually come. The missionaries left Mom and Dad with a copy of the Book of Mormon, and true to their word, they left instructions for the next set of missionaries to contact us. We didn't know they had a system. Smile. Western New York State is bitter cold in the winter because of the high humidity from the Great Lakes. Every year, Dad stapled up visqueen, a heavy-duty plastic sheeting, over the windows of the house to provide a little extra insulation. The trouble with visqueen is that once it's up, you can't see out of the windows very clearly. One cold night, Mom and Dad were in the living room when they saw two figures going in front of the window, making their way to the front door. Mom always told me she didn't know who got to the front door first, her or Dad. They both knew immediately the figures were the elders. Come to find out, both of my parents were reading the Book of Mormon, but neither told the other. The missionaries were Elder Ripley and Elder Jones. By now, I know they didn't have the same first name, Smile. The missionaries were welcomed with open arms. They began teaching the lessons to us, and we were eating them up. I can still picture some of the flannel board displays they shared. One was 2 books coming together into one. Another time, Elder Ripley removed his watch before he could restore it back onto his wrist. I was asked if I believed Moses was a prophet. Wouldn't the Lord still have prophets today? Week after week, I was asked if I had read any of the Book of Mormon. Week after week, I told them no, until the time I could say I had read everything that was marked in red. I remember the night the elders gave us the lesson of the word of wisdom. Dad was in his chair by the window, smoking his pipe. I was sitting across the room from him. One of the elders asked Dad if he could live the word of wisdom. Dad took his pipe from his mouth, turned it over into the ashtray, tapped it a couple of times to get the tobacco out, and said, I'll try anything once. If the truth be known, he had tried giving up smoking time and time again. This time it worked. The elder went around the room and asked each of us if we could live the word of wisdom. When he came to me, I thought smoking gags me. I took a puff once, only once. Wine does the same thing to me, and beer smells sick, and tea and coffee were so awful. Could I live the word of wisdom? I already was. The elder then asked if I thought Mom and Dad could live it. I told him Mom would be able to, but Dad never could. Dad showed me to be wrong. We met in a little rented house for church back in those days. People from 50 miles around came to our meetings. With all that, we had about 15 people. Wellsville was a dependent branch, and the man who presided, Brother Martinez, asked Dad to be the chorister even before he was baptized. Dad's idea of directing the music was to just beat his arm up and down and tap his foot. Dad was also asked to teach a Sunday school lesson once. The subject was baptism. Shortly thereafter, Dad was baptized. Clever man, that Ray Martinez. I still recall the first Fast and Testimony meeting I attended, including where I was sitting. David Crottle, a boy about 13 years old, stood to bear his testimony and said that he was thankful for the prophet David O. McKay. What? I thought his name was Joseph Smith. Who's David O. McKay? The missionaries told me afterwards that he was the current prophet. Current prophet? Nobody said anything about a current prophet. I thought Joseph Smith was the prophet who restored the church, and that was that. It never occurred to me that God still spoke to man. Mom had been thrown into the lake as a little girl and had a tremendous fear of water. Even though we had a swimming pool, Mom wouldn't put her face in the water. She always swam in the side stroke where her face wasn't entirely outside the water. One day, Dad looked out the window and saw Mom in the pool, holding her nose and dipping just her face in the water. He motioned me over to the window to watch and said he knew she was trying to get up the courage to be baptized. Mom was finally ready. She took a couple months longer than Dad. The day of Mom's baptism was so much fun. All these nice people from church were coming to our house to enjoy the afternoon. We were using the pool for the baptism because it was conveniently right there. At that time, I was lackadaisical about the church. It was okay, a little interesting, and that's about it. I was walking around in the kitchen as everyone was getting ready to go out to the pool. I know right where I was standing, right in front of our stove. Then out of nowhere, a feeling came over me that I had never experienced before, and in my mind, I knew what Mom was doing was right. Just like that, I knew. I hadn't been asking and didn't really care one way or the other, but there it was, August 19th, 1966, in our kitchen on Mapes Road, Wellsville, New York. There you have it. Bye.